Hey there riders, Moto Journo Kris here today, and I thought I'd talk about picking your first motorcycle in 2024. I've got a couple of different options that basically represent different classes of motorcycles, and I thought I'd talk about the strengths and weaknesses of each. As long as you're buying within reason, most of the beginner-centric machines are pretty flexible. They're pretty good utility bikes that should handle a wide variety of uses. However, it's important that you buy a motorcycle that fits what you like, obviously, that you're going to be proud of, and that at the end of the day you're very, very happy to be on for a couple of years, because particularly here in Australia you'll be spending at least 3 years on your beginner bike, and for most people that's quite the investment in time and training. So putting aside probably the most important factor about your first motorcycle, which is honestly reliability, we're just going to talk about the types of bikes, and I'm going to start at what is arguably the most iconic style of motorcycle apart from perhaps the cruiser, and that is the sports bike, as you see here. This is a little Ninja 400. Obviously the Ninja 500 is coming out in 2024, but there hasn't been a lot of change, and this is a very popular motorcycle, and there's a good reason for that. And this style of bike, of course, is quite popular as well, because so many people love the full fairings, the sporty look, obviously the kind of racing heritage that's behind these machines. And one of the great things about this kind of style bike, which is basically a supersport 300 machine, which stretches from the 300 to the 400cc category, these bikes are very much designed for an entry-level rider. And while they are still raced quite successfully in their own class of bike, if you buy one of these off the showroom floor, while there's a little bit of variance between the different models, they are a very easy bike to jump onto and ride, despite having the full race look. And obviously the race look is what catches a lot of people's eyes. Now there are some advantages to the full fairings and some disadvantages to the full fairings, and I will quickly go over them for you if you're considering this style of bike. I would certainly say don't let people kind of turn you off this style of bike. People will say do not buy a Supersport 600 bike, because those are probably the worst beginner motorcycle you can buy. But it is a very different proposition when we're talking about these Supersport 300 style machines. Now, one big advantage with the fairings is obviously you're getting some wind protection. So if you're doing a lot of highway mileage, that will be a benefit compared to a naked bike, particularly like something that you're seeing here. There's only a small screen, but it does offer a nice bit of wind protection. Obviously, a little bit of protection if it's raining and things like that. It's not a huge amount of protection because this isn't a sports tourer. However, it is very, very welcome when you're doing the higher speeds and from an aerodynamic perspective. It is also a much easier bike to keep clean because the fairings, you just wash it down, you polish them up, and it's much simpler than naked bikes where you've got a lot more engine components which are visible that you do want to keep clean. The downsides to a bike like this, which the first is a small one, because you've obviously got a lot of fairings, these bikes do catch the wind a little bit more than the other style of bikes. And as a result, when you're riding in heavy crosswinds, you will feel the winds kind of pushing you around a little bit more. It's not a massive issue, I wouldn't say. And it's important, obviously, to note that because these are a lighter motorcycle, they all get pushed around a little bit more in the wind. That's normally a more scary kind of experience for new riders. However, you do get used to it quite quickly. Probably the bigger downside to the fairings is if you're taking the fairings off to service the bike, whether you're doing it yourself or paying someone to do it, it'll either cost you time when you take the fairings off to service, or it'll cost you money when someone else does it, which is a little additional cost. But if you're getting the bike serviced once a year, it's probably an extra hour to the servicing, which isn't too bad. I wouldn't let that sway me from buying one of these bikes if I love the Supersport style machine. So keep that in mind. But certainly I think these are a great option. And if you're really into the racing style of bike, something like a Ninja 400, Ninja 500, RC390, R3, there are some differences obviously between each of these models, but they are a great style of motorcycle that will be very, very rewarding to ride. Let's move over to the new most popular segment of motorcycles, which is the adventure bike. And we've got the 390 Adventure from KTM here. As far as the adventure bikes, these are a little bit of an amalgamation of a number of different kind of styles of bikes to create a machine which, generally speaking, has a little bit of off-road cred, normally a little bit more suspension travel to make it a little bit more comfortable in those off-road conditions. They don't tend to be super off-road orientated machines. They're more of a balance between off-road and road, and they are quite comfortable, generally speaking, again, for a little bit of touring, a little bit of light touring. So you could certainly go around Australia on a bike like the 390 Adventure. It's got a relatively high seat compared to most of the other classes of bikes, and that's quite common in the adventure machines because the longer travel suspension lifts the whole bike up, which does help comfort. However, the trade-off is in the seat height. You've got these nice, tall, wide bars as well for a really nice upright seating position. You've only got a little bit of wind protection here, but obviously better than a naked bike. And as far as the overall kind of style of bike, there's a good mix of balance, good road manners, and of course, a little bit of that off-road cred with some dual purpose tires in them. Obviously, any bike you could put the dual purpose tires on, but there are some small advantages in picking an adventure bike out of the box, as far as being a little bit more orientated towards the light off-road use, which is certainly the case with something like the 390 Adventure. There's lots and lots of options, and the options are increasing now, and we do see probably a little bit of overlap with some of the scrambler options that are coming out, because unlike some of the bigger adventure bikes, which can be quite off-road orientated and a lot more touring orientated, these entry-level machines are much closer to the naked bikes they tend to be based on. So probably the downside, I would say, with the adventure bikes is in some of them, particularly with something like the 390 Adventure, you're paying a little bit of a premium over something like the 390 Duke or even the RC390, which are the naked bike and the sports bike versions, for getting the Adventure. But you can see there are different areas where obviously that is justified somewhat. It's going to come down to your personal judgment. If you're trying to spend as little money as possible and you're not really sure you're going to be doing any off-roading, perhaps an adventure bike isn't for you. If you're really interested in being able to explore everywhere, I think the adventure bikes are a really safe choice, particularly for people who aren't particularly sure what type of bike they really want at the end of the day. These are super flexible. The reason adventure bikes have become so popular is because they're a do-everything bike, and that includes a bit of touring. So it means you can practically do anything on one of these machines. Perhaps not super tight Singer Trails kind of stuff, where something like the WR, a dual sport, will be a little bit better, but people make do on these all the time. Nothing wrong with them at all. Let's move over to the WR. So dual sport machines are probably one of the most niche machines. Unlike the adventure bikes, which tend to appeal to an enormous amount of riders, can actually be a bike that'll suit a very wide variety of riders without trading off too much. Dual sports are basically generally plated dirt bikes. And while we talk about something like, say, the WR250R or something available new now, the CRF300 Rally, they are designed to have nice long service intervals, so they don't need to be serviced all the time if you're doing longer Ks on them. They're a little bit more gently tuned, I guess you'd say, as well. So these are very, very down on performance when we're talking, as I said, about something like the WR250R, CRF300 Rally. If you go to a DRZ400, those do have quite a bit more performance than these two options. However, you're not getting as good a highway cred. They are highway capable, but they're not going to be the best machine for it. They're not going to be as good as an adventure bike. However, where the advantages tend to really show themselves on a dual sport bike, this is lighter than both of these bikes over here. Both of these bikes are quite light. I think the Ninja's about 160, 170 kilos. I think the 390 Adventure might be a little bit heavier because obviously it's the adventure bike. It's a little more beefy than something like the 390 Duke, but they are both quite light bikes. This is 130 kilos, and that's something shared with the CRF300 Rally and the DRZ400. They save about 30 or 40 kilos, which makes them much easier to handle off-road. The downside is these things have really long travel suspension, and that lifts the seat up. This seat is significantly higher than any kind of road bike that you're going to jump onto. If you're a shorter rider, while they are a somewhat manageable machine just because they're so light, they're very, very tall. And for a lot of people, they can't make that work. Again, these are not going to be as good a road bike as any of the more specific road bike options or even the adventure options. However, where they are going to shine is in the off-roading and the trail riding and things like that, where obviously these are a much, much stronger option. However, when you get to the freeway, if you're riding a lot, because one of the advantages of the dual sport, the plated dual sport, is obviously you can ride it on the road to get to your trails. You don't need a ute or you don't need to trail a bike somewhere to ride them. Obviously the huge advantage there, but you're trading off quite a bit of performance, generally speaking. There are some much more performance-orientated dual sports. However, I think one of the common things I've really seen is they're never an amazing highway machine. While you can do it, they're never going to be as good as a tourer, as an adventure bike, anything like that. So there's definitely a trade-off to be made. And I would say the dual sports, particularly the lower powered dual sports, they are more of a niche bike. They're not going to appeal to everyone. For some riders, they will jump on one of these and be quite happy with the off-road performance, but find the performance quite lacking. It's more of a style of bike, again, talking about the ones I specifically mentioned, which suit someone who likes a bike that will take them anywhere, but perhaps not as quick as you might like. And they can be quite a good machine around town as well. However, if you're running big knobbies like I've got on the WR250R here, you will find you're trading off a little bit of that street cred for the off-road grip. Nothing wrong with that. I can still do the freeway and sit comfortably at 110, even 120 on this bike. However, I did notice when I took the original trail wings off and put the D606s on, the highway top speed that I could do quite comfortably did drop quite significantly. So just keep that in mind. Obviously, I don't have a naked bike here. I unfortunately don't have my Svartpilen 401 with me because I was doing quite a bit of freeway to get up here. I took the Ninja 400 with the top box on it. It's a little bit more comfortable on the freeway. But if you're thinking about a naked bike is essentially the generic motorcycle. It doesn't have the fairings. It's more like the 390 Adventure or the WR in that it doesn't have all of that bodywork on it. However, obviously most naked bikes are very road orientated, and if you're looking at something like a Z400 or a 390 Duke, they're not that different than the Supersport 300 versions of those bikes. They've got a little bit more upright seating position. Seat heights tend to not change all that much between these Supersport 300s and the naked bike versions of them, because to keep them very, very new rider friendly, they've kept the bikes quite similar. These have slightly more aggressive bikes on the sport bike version, where you've got normally a flatter and slightly taller handlebar, but there's not a huge amount of change. However, as I did mention earlier, not having the fairings makes them a little bit cheaper and easier to service. They are a little bit harder to keep clean, and a lot of people really love the styling of the naked bikes. And if that's the case for you, definitely consider them, because I would probably say the easiest bike to get started on is a naked bike. While there's not a huge difference, it is there. And if you already like that style of bike, you should always pick the style of bike that you really love as your first motorcycle, because that's what's going to keep you happy long term. Now, down the track, you might find yourself thinking, you know what, I started on a sports bike, but I really want an adventure machine. That's cool. It's very, very normal as you ride more to change your mind about exactly what you like, and that is part of the process. It's not getting something wrong, it's just learning what kind of motorcycle you like in the long term, and you will probably try multiple different types of motorcycles over the years, unless you're a cruiser rider who doesn't ride anything but cruisers, which is a little bit more common in that category, where I would say in other styles of bikes, we do see people trying different bikes a lot more commonly. Anyway, if you've got any questions specifically about these machines, let me know down below in the comments. As always, I'll do my best to answer your questions. Stay safe out there and have a good one.